Okay, right. As always, when using polyester resin, we make sure we've got goggles and gloves on, as it's important to protect ourselves from this material, as it is particularly hazardous. So first, we'll put the cup on our scales, press 0 to take the weight of the cup away. Then we get some GP resin. You can always tell it hasn't had catalyst in because of the colour. Once we've worked out our percentage, 2%, using the decimal point system, we zero the scales and add our catalyst, very carefully. Understand that when we add the metal powder in, it's going to fill this resin to become up to half its volume again. Using a clean stick, we stir this, making sure the catalyst mixed in thoroughly. Now we've got our resin mixed up with catalyst, we can add our metal powder. In this case, we're going to choose aluminium powder. As always, when you cold metal casting, we must powder the mould first. This adds a greater lustre to the metal and gives it a more realistic appearance. Pour a small amount of dry metal powder into your silicone mould and tap the powder around the mould until you're happy there's an adequate covering. Tip the mould over, tap it out as best you can, make sure all those clumps of powder are out of the mould. If you leave any clumps of powder in there, it's going to affect the quality of your casting. So you must ensure that they're all out of there, so give it a good slap. Right, okay. Now we need to saturate the resin with the metal powder itself as well. This might take a few minutes, so be patient. So we need to pour in a little bit first, stir it in, pour in a little bit more, stir it in, pour in a bit more. Each time you pour it in, just lift your stick and just check the consistency of it. If it dribbles off the stick, it's far too thin. We need it as thick as we can. Right, now as you can see, it is getting quite thick now. So let's pour it into the mould now. We'll pour it in quite slowly because it's quite a thick material. As always, when we're doing this kind of mould, we don't want to fill it up all the way first. And just pour a little bit in first and then manoeuvre it around the mould, flexing the rubber and ensuring that we don't trap any air bubbles against the surface of the mould. It might mean that you need to employ the use of a stick to press it into the finer details, as the resin is quite thick at this stage. You have plenty of time to work with it, as the resin doesn't set for anything between 20 minutes and half an hour working time. When you're happy, all the details covered, just give a final flex just to make sure, again, there's no air bubbles trapped underneath, and then fill the mould. So just top that up now. As you can see, it flows quite slowly because it's so thick. The thicker it is, the more metal content is in the resin. Just give it a little tap on the table to even off the surface. This also helps any large air bubbles that are trapped in the resin to surface. Okay, so after about half an hour to an hour, the casting should be ready to demould. You can accelerate that process by putting it in the oven, or ideally wait overnight. So, as we said before, we need some sandpaper to bring up the lustre of the metal. So for this one we're going to use 240 grit, wet and dry. Okay, wet the object, wet your sandpaper, and then lightly just sand the surface of the object all over. Try and keep this as even as possible and do not concentrate on one area for too long, as you'll sand through the powder coating that we put on before we add the resin. Okay, next move on to 400. Ideally you'd use 320 in between the 240 and the 400 to get the best finish. Once you're happy with the sanding, you shouldn't see any large scratch marks on the surface, and it should all look a uniform finish. So first, as always, when using the buffing wheel, health and safety, dust mask, essential for stopping the lint going into your lungs, into the back of your throat, irritate. Make sure you pinch it around your nose to get a good seal. So as well as the dust mask, we need a visor. The visor is adjusted like this. Place over your head. Adjust it until it's tight, but comfortably so. Alright, here we go. Remember, left side is for the metal, right side is for plastics. This is an abrasive to help polish and flatten the surface of the metal, giving us that realistic shine and luster. Do not lead with your top edge. You must lead with the bottom edge only. Immediately you should see a change in the appearance of the surface of your casting. It should start to get really shiny, really metal-like. Every minute or so, add a little bit more buffing compound. And again, we use the corner of the buffing wheel, not the forward-facing front. A centrifugal force can make the fibres stand on end and become very hard and may burn or melt the resin casting. Remember, although it looks like metal, it is in fact resin. If you drop it, it'll shatter. It'll also burn if you overheat it with the buffing wheel. So a little bit more buffing compound. Again, bottom edge leading. It's very important. Always ask me to demonstrate if you're not sure. It's a very quick, simple, easy process. Give it a final shine and get any of the black residue off caused by the buffing compound. Okay, that's it. And there you have it.